Hey, what's going on everyone? It's me, Marco from PhoneDog.com, and if you've watched my previous video about the Sony NEX5T, you know I really love cameras. So this week we have a different camera for you. It's actually the Nikon Coolpix A. Now this camera is a very strange type of camera. It's a point-and-shoot camera, but it has an APS-C size sensor inside and a fixed lens. From looks alone, this camera looks like an old-school retro camera. It actually kind of reminds me of a Nikon F series of film cameras. The point of this camera is kind of weird. It is a point-and-shoot camera, it has an APS-C size sensor, and it has a fixed lens on here, which means you can't change the lenses, but you do have a full-size DX crop size sensor on here. You have an 18.5 wide-angle lens on the front. It's about 27 millimeters equivalent on this camera. So instead of going with the popular 1-inch sensor like the Nikon 1 cameras or the Sony RX100s, they did manage to fit a full-size APS-C size sensor, which is really impressive considering the size of this camera. It is almost pocketable. And now thinking about it, it is really impressive. This is the smallest camera with an APS-C sensor in the world. And I see exactly why Nikon didn't fit a smaller 1-inch sensor. Bigger sensors give out better images. It means more light, less grain, and a shallower depth of field. The sensor itself is a 16 megapixel CMOS sensor. It's basically the same sensor out of a Nikon D7100. The controls of the camera are pretty basic. Most of your manual inputs will come through the software. Now there is one weird kink out of this camera. There's no movie record button. That's because Nikon decided that a camera capable of shooting 1080p video should have a movie record function embedded in the settings in some weird menu. If you ask me, that's pretty ridiculous. Now let's talk about the image quality. My first few days of shooting with this camera were really frustrating. The fixed lens is fine, but the recessed focus ring proved to be a pain to use. Leaving it in autofocus is fine, but I really like to use manual focus. The images that are coming out of this camera were really good, really sharp throughout the whole image, no vignetting, and no soft corners. All great things. But the low light performance was also really good. The noise was more coarse than fine, but you would expect that for a very consumer-oriented camera. Now in terms of video, it does record 1080p 30p, but no 60p found here. The video was fine. Autofocus was fast and silent. It's definitely a good point-and-shoot camera for videos. Now there is one ginormous downside to this camera, and that's battery life. Things of point-and-shoot cameras are they're really small, and batteries cannot be very big. So this camera can last about 1 or 2 hours on one battery. Cameras like the Sony RX100 and the NEX cameras can last about 3 or 4 hours on one single battery. So the Coolpix A is a DSLR camera for those who don't want a DSLR, but you really have to pay for it. This camera is $1,000. But for that, you don't have to worry about lenses or filters or any of that mess of the DSLRs. But doesn't that miss the point of having a digital SLR camera? You want to have lenses. You want to change the look of your shots. And with this camera and having a fixed focal length and one fixed lens on the camera, you do lose that ginormous opportunity of experimenting. But as I said, it's a good point-and-shoot high-quality camera for those who don't want to fuss with carrying around lenses. You could throw this in your bag and use it everywhere you go, and that's exactly what it's good at.